A young poor nurse was hired to care for a disabled man in the hospital, unaware that he was a millionaire, and soon he would fall in love with her. The hospital was alive with activity. Fluorescent lights flickered above as hurried footsteps echoed through the hallways. Muffled voices blended with the rhythmic beeping of machines. Nurses rushed between rooms, their colorful scrubs a stark contrast to the sterile white walls. Patients anxiously waited, some on gurneys, others seated, the air thick with antiseptic and unspoken tension. Olivia Collins adjusted her overstuffed bag on her shoulder as she navigated through the chaos. Her shift had just started, but the weight of long hours at work and the responsibility of taking care of her younger brother at home clung to her like a second skin. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end and like the video because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. Room 4002 today. Good luck with that one, a fellow nurse called as Olivia passed by the station. Olivia paused, raising an eyebrow. "Why do I need luck?" she asked, confused. The nurse shrugged, a sly smile playing on her lips. "You'll see," she said cryptically. With a sense of apprehension, Olivia headed toward room 4002, the sound of her sensible shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. When she stepped inside, her eyes landed on the patient sitting by the window. Benjamin Black, a man in a wheelchair, sat with his broad shoulders hunched forward, his gaze fixed on the outside world. He seemed like a man who had lost everything. The sunlight filtering through the window only highlighted the hard, bitter lines of his face. A palpable wall of resentment seemed to push everyone and everything away. "Good morning, Mr. Black," Olivia greeted him in a professional yet warm tone. He didn't turn to face her. "Don't bother," he replied coldly. "I don't need another nurse pretending to care." Olivia blinked, taken aback by the sharpness of his words. Her grip tightened on the clipboard she carried as she stepped further into the room. "I'm not pretending. I'm your nurse for today." Benjamin let out a bitter laugh, finally turning to face her. His piercing blue eyes locked with hers, a mixture of defiance and pain reflected in them. "Is that supposed to mean something? You'll just be another face that comes and goes?" Olivia's lips tightened, but she remained composed. She had dealt with difficult patients before, but Benjamin's hostility struck a chord. Taking a steadying breath, she set the clipboard on the small table beside his bed. "I understand you're frustrated," she said calmly, "but I'm here to help you, whether you like it or not." Benjamin snapped, his voice rising. "I don't need help. What I need is for everyone to leave me alone." Olivia's calm demeanor cracked ever so slightly as she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Look, Mr. Black, I'm not here to pity you or waste your time. I'm here to do my job. Whether you cooperate or not is up to you, but I'll tell you this, your attitude isn't going to make things any easier for either of us." Benjamin stared at her, clearly not expecting such a firm response. The room was silent, the tension thick in the air. Finally, he leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression guarded. "You're not like the others," he muttered under his breath. Olivia arched an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" Benjamin smirked faintly but didn't respond, his gaze returning to the window. Olivia resisted the urge to roll her eyes and instead focused on his chart. "Fine. Let's start with the basics. I need to check your vitals and review your medications." Benjamin didn't respond, but he didn't resist either as she began her routine. His silence, though heavy with resentment, was a small victory in Olivia's eyes. As she worked, she couldn't help but steal glances at him. He was young, probably in his mid-30s, with faint stubble on his jawline and tension in his posture. Despite the obvious physical toll his condition had taken on him, there was still an air of confidence about him, though it seemed to be buried deep beneath the surface. "You don't have to talk to me," Olivia said after a while, her tone softening. But if you ever decide you want to, I'm here." Benjamin didn't look at her, but the slight clenching of his jaw told her that her words had reached him. After finishing her tasks, Olivia straightened up and grabbed the clipboard. "I'll be back in a few hours to check on you," she said as she made her way to the door. Before she could leave, Benjamin's voice stopped her. "You won't last," he said, his tone challenging. Olivia paused and glanced over her shoulder. "We'll see about that." With that, she stepped out of the room, her heart racing from the confrontation. She had no idea what had brought Benjamin to this point in his life, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just fighting his physical condition. He was battling the world, and perhaps even himself. Olivia slumped into the staff lounge during her short break, running a hand through her hair as she tried to push the morning's tense interaction with Benjamin out of her mind. The other nurses were clustered together, gossiping and sharing complaints about their shifts. One of them called out to her with a smug smile, "How's room 4002 treating you?" Olivia glanced up, narrowing her tired eyes. "Challenging? That's an understatement," she replied dryly. "Impossible. He refuses to let anyone get close." Another nurse chimed in, laughing. "I'm honestly surprised he hasn't scared you off yet." Olivia straightened in her chair, her jaw tightening. She was all too familiar with being underestimated. Her plain scrubs, unpolished demeanor, and faint accent from her working-class upbringing often made her an easy target for quiet mockery. But she refused to let their words affect her. "I can handle it," she said simply, rising from her seat. As she left the lounge, her thoughts shifted back to her family. Her younger brother, Jake, was relying on her to stay in school, and her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. Olivia had no choice but to work harder than anyone else, even if it meant dealing with patients like Benjamin. Meanwhile, Benjamin sat by the window in his room, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair as he stared out at the bustling street below. The people outside, so free to move and live their lives, felt like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. Before the accident, his life had been everything he'd dreamed of. He was a self-made millionaire, a confident, ambitious man who thrived on challenges. But now, he was confined to this chair, his independence taken away. His body felt like a shadow of what it once was. He kept his identity a secret, refusing to let the nurses or doctors know who he truly was. The last thing he wanted was their pity, or worse, their opportunistic smiles as they tried to curry favor with a rich man. The sound of the door opening broke him from his thoughts. Olivia walked in, carrying a tray with his medications and a clipboard. She approached him calmly, her steps measured. "Good afternoon, Mr. Black," she greeted him professionally. Benjamin didn't look at her, his gaze still fixed on the window. What now? More poking and prodding? Olivia placed the tray down on the table beside him. "Just your medication and a quick check of your vitals. Nothing too invasive." He scoffed, his lips curling into a bitter smirk. How considerate. Olivia ignored his sarcasm and pulled out her stethoscope. "Let's start with your blood pressure." Benjamin reluctantly extended his arm, his movements stiff. As she wrapped the cuff around his arm, she noticed the faint, dark circles under her eyes and the determined set of her jaw. "You don't strike me as the type who gives up easily," he said suddenly. Olivia glanced at him, surprised by the observation. "No, I don't. Why?" he pressed. Olivia hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because I can't afford to." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I have responsibilities, people depending on me, my brother, my mother. Giving up isn't an option." For a brief moment, Benjamin's expression softened, but it was quickly replaced by his usual guarded demeanor. "Must be exhausting, being everyone's savior." Olivia smiled faintly. "Not as exhausting as being miserable all the time." Benjamin stiffened, her words clearly hitting a nerve. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Olivia said, meeting his gaze. but I do know that shutting everyone out won't help you. You're not the only one who's been through something difficult." Benjamin's jaw tightened, and he turned his chair slightly, effectively ending the conversation. The rest of the day passed in a tense rhythm. Olivia checked on Benjamin at regular intervals, each visit met with curt responses and pointed glares. Despite his resistance, she remained patient, her demeanor steady. Late in the afternoon, Olivia returned to his room to find him struggling to reach a book on the bedside table. His wheelchair was angled awkwardly, and his face wore a mix of frustration and stubborn pride. "Let me help you," Olivia said, stepping forward. "I've got it," Benjamin snapped, his hand slipping from the book. Olivia didn't back down. She picked up the book and held it out to him. "Here." Benjamin glared at her but took the book reluctantly. "I didn't ask for your help." "And I didn't ask for your approval," Olivia replied evenly. Benjamin stared at her, his frustration briefly giving way to a flicker of admiration. She was different, unapologetically honest and unafraid to challenge him. As Olivia left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Benjamin than just his harsh words and guarded demeanor. No matter how much he tried to push her away, she was determined to break through. For Benjamin, her persistence was both frustrating and oddly comforting. For the first time in a long while, he found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face his struggles alone. The room was quiet when Olivia entered for her afternoon rounds. Benjamin was sitting by the window as usual, his wheelchair turned to face the city skyline. But this time, something caught her eye. A book resting on his lap. The hardcover had a sleek black cover with bold gold letters. Principles of Investment Strategy. Olivia hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. "Light reading, I see," she remarked with a small smile. Benjamin glanced up for a moment, then returned his attention to the book. "Something like that." Her curiosity piqued. Olivia crossed the room and began tidying the tray table. "I didn't take you for someone interested in investment strategies." He snapped the book shut, his gaze sharp. "What kind of person did you take me for?" Olivia shrugged, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "Someone who pretends not to care, but clearly does." "Otherwise, you wouldn't be reading something like that," she gestured toward the book. Benjamin's lips twitched, the faintest trace of a smile threatening to break through. Fair point. Encouraged by the lack of hostility, Olivia leaned casually against the counter, crossing her arms. "So, are you reading for fun, or are you planning to become the next Warren Buffett?" Benjamin smirked faintly. "I think it's safe to say my days of dominating the financial world are behind me." Olivia tilted her head, intrigued. "The financial world? That's a pretty specific phrase." He realized his slip too late, his smirk fading into something more guarded. "It's just a personal interest. Keeps my mind occupied." Olivia didn't press further, sensing his reluctance. Instead, she shifted the conversation. "Well, it's good to keep your mind active. A lot of patients I've worked with struggle to find purpose during recovery. It's nice to see you doing something for yourself." Benjamin watched her closely, searching her expression for any sign of condescension. When he didn't find any, he relaxed slightly. "Yeah, well, not like I've got much else to do." Olivia smiled. "You'd be surprised how many people choose Netflix over self-improvement. Looks like you've already got them beat." Benjamin chuckled, a low, unexpected sound that seemed to surprise both of them. Over the next few days, their interactions became less tense. Olivia made a habit of asking about the books Benjamin was reading, carefully steering their conversations toward topics he felt comfortable discussing. One afternoon, as she checked his vitals, she noticed another book on his bedside table. This one about venture capital and startup funding. "You know," Olivia said casually, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his arm, "you've got quite the collection of business books. Ever think about teaching a class?" Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "Teaching? Yeah, sure. Right after I get out of this chair." Olivia jotted down his numbers without missing a beat. "You clearly know a lot. You could probably give those Ivy League professors a run for their money." Benjamin let out a dry laugh. "Doubt it." Besides, people like me don't exactly inspire confidence these days. Olivia paused, lowering her clipboard. Why do you say that? He shrugged, his gaze dropping to his lap. Because I'm stuck in this chair. People see the wheelchair before they see me. Olivia's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She stepped closer, her expression softening. I don't see a wheelchair when I look at you, Benjamin. I see someone who's smart, determined, and, if I'm being honest, a little too stubborn for his own good. Benjamin looked up, his eyes searching hers for sincerity. You don't pity me. No, she said firmly. I respect you. There's a difference. For a moment, Benjamin was silent, his defenses wavering. You're not like the others, he said quietly. Olivia smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. Their conversations became a regular part of Olivia's visits. She learned that Benjamin had a sharp wit and an impressive understanding of finance, though he rarely revealed much about his past. Every time she tried to dig deeper, he skillfully redirected the conversation. One day, however, his guard finally slipped. Olivia had just finished helping him with his physical therapy exercises when she noticed a stack of papers on the table. Among them was a detailed business plan, complete with projections and market analyses. She picked it up, skimming through the first page. This is impressive, she said, furrowing her brows. Did you write this? Benjamin stiffened and quickly reached for the papers. It's nothing, just an old project. Olivia held on to them for a moment longer, her curiosity piqued. Old project? This doesn't look like an old project. It looks like something straight out of a Harvard case study. Where did you learn to do this? He hesitated, his expression unreadable. I used to work in finance, he admitted reluctantly. Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. Really? That explains a lot. You're not just reading those books, you lived them. Benjamin nodded, though his gaze remained distant. Yeah, I lived them. Built a company from the ground up. It was everything to me. Olivia noticed the shift in his tone, the faint hint of pain beneath the words. She gently placed the papers down. What happened? Benjamin took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. An accident. It changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't the man people respected. I was just someone they pitied. Olivia's chest tightened at the weight of his words. That must have been incredibly hard. It was, Benjamin admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It still is. Olivia stepped closer, resting her hand lightly on his arm. You're still that man, Benjamin. You're still capable of so much. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise. He looked at her, his eyes softening in a way she hadn't seen before. You really believe that? I do, she said with quiet conviction. For the first time in months, Benjamin felt a spark of something he thought he'd lost. The hospital was unusually quiet that morning, with the steady hum of activity muted by the early hour. Olivia Collins walked briskly down the hall, her clipboard in hand, ready to begin her rounds. Room 4002 was her first stop, as it had been for weeks. As she approached Benjamin's room, she slowed her pace, noticing the door was slightly ajar. Inside, muffled voices floated out. One man and one woman, their tones hushed, but unmistakably intense. He's been like this ever since the accident, the man said, his voice heavy with frustration. What did you expect, Darren? The woman replied sharply. Benjamin's pride has always been his downfall. He's too stubborn to accept help, even from us. Olivia frowned, curiosity piqued. She peeked through the crack in the door and saw a well-dressed couple standing near Benjamin's wheelchair. The man's expensive suit and the woman's designer handbag looked completely out of place in the sterile hospital room. We're doing everything we can, the man, Darren, continued, but the board's getting restless. They want Benjamin back, or at least a clear decision about the company's future. The woman sighed, crossing her arms. He won't even let us tell anyone he's here. Do you know how much easier this would be if people knew Benjamin Blackwell, the CEO of Blackwell Ventures, was recovering? The sympathy alone could buy us time. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. CEO of Blackwell Ventures? She stepped back from the door, her mind racing. The Benjamin she knew, the reserved, bitter man in room 4002, was a millionaire. Not just any millionaire, but the head of one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. Her hands trembled as she gripped the clipboard tighter, her chest tightening with a mix of shock and confusion. Benjamin had never mentioned anything about his wealth, his status, or the company. Why didn't he tell me? She wondered silently. She didn't have time to dwell on it. The door opened suddenly, and the couple stepped out, halting when they saw her. "Excuse me," she said, forcing a professional tone. "I didn't mean to overhear." The woman gave her a quick once-over, her expression unreadable. "You're his nurse, right?" "Yes," Olivia replied, her voice sharp. "I am." "Well," Darren said, adjusting his tie. "Good luck. You're going to need it." They walked away, leaving Olivia standing frozen in the hallway. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and stepped into Benjamin's room. He looked up as she entered, his usual guarded expression softening just a bit. "You're early," he remarked. Olivia didn't respond right away. She placed the clipboard on the table and crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "You didn't tell me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You didn't tell me you're Benjamin Blackwell." Benjamin furrowed his brow. "Tell you what?" "That you're a millionaire CEO," she replied, her tone growing sharper. "Not just some guy recovering in a hospital." Benjamin's jaw tightened, and he turned his gaze away. "So you heard." "I heard enough," Olivia said, her frustration seeping through. "Why hide something like that? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Benjamin sighed deeply, gripping the arms of his wheelchair. "It's not about hiding," he said quietly. "It's about surviving." "Surviving," Olivia repeated, incredulous. "You're a millionaire, Benjamin. You don't need to survive." He shot back, his voice rising. "You think money makes everything easier? Do you have any idea what it's like to have people look at you and only see dollar signs, to wonder if they care about you or what you can do for them?" Olivia flinched, but stood her ground. "I don't care about your money, Benjamin. I care that you hid this from me." "I didn't hide," Benjamin replied, his tone softer now. "I just didn't tell you. I've seen how people change when they know who I am. I couldn't handle that again. Not here. Not with you." Olivia's heart twisted at his words, but her frustration remained. "And what about me?" she asked. "You spent weeks talking to me, letting me believe one thing while the truth was something entirely different." Benjamin's shoulders sagged, his expression filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Olivia. I never meant to hurt you. I don't know how to be vulnerable anymore." The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For the first time, she saw past the bitterness and bravado to the wounded man beneath. Olivia took a deep breath and forced herself to meet his gaze. "I need some time to process this, Benjamin. I'm not saying I can't understand, but I need you to be honest with me from now on. No more secrets." Benjamin nodded, his relief apparent. "No more secrets." Olivia turned to leave, pausing at the door. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I don't see dollar signs when I look at you. I see a man who's trying to find himself again." As the door closed behind her, Benjamin sat in silence, her words lingering in his mind. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile thread that maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild the trust he had nearly shattered. The tension between Olivia Collins and Benjamin Blackwell had been simmering for days since the revelation of his true identity. Their conversations became cautious and measured, filled with an unspoken weight. Olivia continued to visit him, performing her duties with her usual professionalism. But the easy camaraderie they once shared was gone. Benjamin noticed the change every time Olivia spoke to him. Her tone was clipped, her responses curt. She no longer lingered to ask about the books on his bedside table or to engage in light-hearted banter, and it was driving him mad. One afternoon, as Olivia adjusted the pillows behind him, Benjamin broke the silence. "Are you ever going to talk to me again?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "I'm talking to you now," Olivia replied, not meeting his gaze. "You know what I mean," Benjamin shot back. "I'm not talking about polite small talk. I'm talking about us." Olivia froze for a moment, then stepped back, her hands clasped in front of her. "There is no us, Benjamin. I'm your nurse, and that's all." Benjamin's chest tightened. "Don't do that, Olivia. Don't act like what we had meant nothing." "What we had?" Olivia repeated, her voice rising slightly. "What did we have, Benjamin? A series of conversations built on half-truths? You never told me the truth about who you were. You let me believe you were just a regular guy, someone struggling like the rest of us. Do you know how disappointing it was to find out the truth from someone else?" Benjamin ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up inside him. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want this," he said, gesturing between them, "to change. You're the first person who's looked at me like I'm more than this chair, more than my money. I didn't want to ruin that." "Well, congratulations," Olivia said bitterly. "You did anyway." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "I don't know what else to say, Olivia. I've apologized. I've explained myself. What more do you want from me?" Olivia shook her head, her voice trembling. "I want to trust you, Benjamin. I really do. But every time I look at you now, I wonder what else you're not telling me." Benjamin's frustration finally broke through. "Why does it always have to be about what I didn't tell you? What about everything I did tell you? The moments we shared, the way I've opened up to you more than I have to anyone in years? Does none of that matter to you?" "It matters," Olivia said quietly, her voice softening. "But so does honesty." Benjamin let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You're punishing me for protecting myself. Do you have any idea what it's like to have everyone around you see you as a paycheck or a sob story? I didn't want you to pity me." Olivia's heart twisted at his words, but her resolve remained strong. "And I did see you, Benjamin. That's why this hurts so much." The room fell into heavy silence, the tension thick in the air. Finally, Benjamin spoke, his voice low and angry. "If you're waiting for me to grovel, you'll be waiting a long time." Olivia's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with resolve. "You think this is about groveling? This is about accountability, Benjamin. It's about you owning up to the fact that you broke my trust." "I've done everything I can to fix this," Benjamin said, his voice rising. "But if that's not enough for you, maybe you're the one with the problem, not me." Olivia stared at him, her heart pounding. She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself, shaking her head. "I can't do this," she said softly. Benjamin's expression faltered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can't keep being your nurse," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "Not like this." "Olivia, wait," Benjamin began, his tone desperate. But Olivia stepped back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Benjamin. I care about you, but I can't keep putting myself in a position where I don't feel safe." Before Benjamin could respond, she turned and walked out of the room, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing like the final note of a sad symphony. Benjamin sat in stunned silence, his chest heaving as the weight of her words settled in. He replayed the argument in his mind, his frustration turning inward. For the first time in years, he had let someone into his carefully guarded world, and now, because of his own mistakes, she was gone. He clenched his fists, the helplessness he had fought so hard to suppress, threatening to overwhelm him. He had thought the accident was the worst thing that could happen to him, but losing Olivia Collins, feeling her slip away because of his own actions, was far worse. In the quiet of his room, Benjamin whispered the words he had never dared to say aloud. "I'm falling in love with you, Olivia Collins." But it was too late. she was already gone. The small apartment Olivia Collins shared with her brother was quiet as she sat at the kitchen table, her thoughts clouded with the memory of her last conversation with Benjamin. Days had passed since she left his room, but his words still echoed in her mind. She was startled when Jake entered, holding a thick envelope. "This came for you," Jake said, placing the envelope on the table. Olivia frowned, picking it up. Her name was written across the front in bold, familiar handwriting. Benjamin. Her chest tightened as she opened it and pulled out several handwritten pages. She hesitated for a moment before beginning to read. "Dear Olivia Collins, I'm not good with words, not the kind that really matter. Most of my life has been spent talking numbers, deals, and strategies, things that make sense on paper. But you're not just numbers, Olivia Collins. You're something I can't quantify, something I've struggled to put into words. So I'll start with the truth. You already know my name, but you don't know my story. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. My parents were factory workers, good people who taught me the value of hard work. I was just another kid from a working-class neighborhood, scraping by and dreaming of something bigger. When I was 18, I started my first business, a tiny tech startup run out of my friend's garage. It failed miserably, but I didn't stop. I kept trying, kept failing, until finally, one idea took off. By the time I was 30, I had built Blackwell Ventures into a multi-million-dollar company. I had everything I thought I wanted: money, success, respect. But none of that prepared me for what came next. The accident changed everything. One moment I was on top of the world. The next I was in a hospital bed, unable to move, unable to be the person I once was. The people I thought were my friends disappeared, and the ones who stayed only looked at me with pity. I became bitter, angry, and isolated. I didn't want anyone's help because I didn't believe I deserved it. Then you walked into my life. From the moment we met, you challenged me in ways no one else dared to. You saw past the wheelchair, past the bitterness, and treated me like a person. For the first time in years, I felt like I could be something more than my failures. But I screwed it up. I hurt you because I was too afraid to be vulnerable, too afraid to trust. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Olivia Collins. I know I have to earn that. But I needed you to know the truth about who I am and why I hid it. Not because I don't trust you, but because I've never wanted anyone's opinion to matter as much as yours does. You've shown me kindness, strength, and love, even when I didn't deserve it. I don't know how to repay that, but I want to try. I'm falling in love with you, Olivia Collins. I think I've been falling for a long time. If you can give me one more chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you were right to see the good in me. Yours, Benjamin. By the time Olivia finished reading, tears blurred her vision. She set the letter down, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Benjamin's words had pierced through her doubts, exposing the man behind the walls he had built. She sat in silence for a long time, clutching the letter to her chest. The next day, Olivia returned to the hospital, unsure of what she would say or do. As she approached the therapy room, she heard Benjamin's voice, strained but determined. Peeking through the glass window, she saw him standing, his arms trembling as he leaned on parallel bars. His therapist stood by his side, sweat beading on his forehead, but Benjamin didn't falter. His focus was unwavering. "Just one more step," the therapist encouraged. Benjamin gritted his teeth, his legs shaking as he moved forward. It wasn't graceful, but it was progress. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen him like this, so vulnerable, yet so strong. A voice called softly from behind her. "Olivia Collins," the nurse said. "He asked for you." Olivia nodded, her heart pounding, and opened the door. As she stepped inside, Benjamin looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and relief. For a moment, he seemed to lose his balance, but the therapist steadied him. "Take a break," the therapist said gently, helping Benjamin back into his wheelchair. Olivia approached slowly, unsure of where to start. "Hi," she said softly. Benjamin's lips curved into a faint smile. "Hi." "I got your letter," Olivia said, holding it up. His smile faltered, and she knelt beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. "I believe you." Benjamin's shoulders sagged with relief. "I thought I'd lost you." "You almost did," Olivia admitted, her voice trembling. "But I can see how hard you're trying, Benjamin, and I know now that what you kept from me wasn't about deceit. It was about fear." Benjamin reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I can do that. Be honest. No more secrets." As they sat there, the weight of their past misunderstandings began to lift. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, they faced it together. The therapy room hummed with quiet anticipation as therapists and nurses stood on the sidelines, their attention fixed on Benjamin. He sat at the center of the room, his wheelchair a stark contrast to the calm energy around him. Tension and hope filled the air. Olivia stood beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder, sensing the nervous energy radiating from him. His jaw was clenched, his focus unwavering. "Are you ready?" the therapist asked softly. Benjamin nodded, his grip tightening around the parallel bars in front of him. He took a deep breath, planting his feet firmly on the floor. His arms trembled as he began to lift himself, the strain visible in every muscle, yet in his eyes Olivia saw a fire she had never seen before. "You've got this," Olivia whispered, her voice steady, full of encouragement. Benjamin gritted his teeth, his legs shaking as he pushed himself up. His knees buckled briefly, but he caught himself, his hands gripping the bars with unyielding strength. "Just one more step," the therapist encouraged. "Take your time." Benjamin shifted his weight, his left foot inching forward. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but to Olivia it felt like a triumph. A soft murmur of encouragement rippled through the room, but Benjamin's focus remained locked on Olivia. Her eyes were brimming with pride, her love for him shining through. "You're doing it," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Benjamin, you're standing." A faint smile spread across his face, sweat dripping down his brow. "Only because you're here." The room erupted in applause, but for Benjamin the only sound that mattered was Olivia's voice, her soft words that kept him grounded in the moment. Later that evening, Benjamin and Olivia sat side by side on a bench in the hospital garden. The cool night air was a welcome relief after the intensity of the day. The soft glow of the distant city lights reflected in the night, creating a serene backdrop for their quiet conversation. "You know," Benjamin began, his voice quiet, "there was a time I thought I'd never walk again, never even stand." Olivia turned to him, her hand slipping into his. "And now you're proving everyone wrong, including yourself." He smiled faintly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my anchor, Olivia Collins, my reason to keep going." Olivia looked down, her cheeks flushed. "You give me too much credit." "No," Benjamin said firmly, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. "I mean it. You saw me when I couldn't even see myself. You gave me hope. That's something no amount of money could ever buy." Tears filled Olivia's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "You've come so far, Benjamin. I'm so proud of you." "And I'm proud of you," he replied. "You've shown me what true strength looks like. It's not about power or success. It's about resilience, about showing up for the people you care about no matter how hard things get." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I love you, Olivia Collins. I think I've loved you from the moment you stormed into my room and told me off." Olivia laughed softly, her tears spilling over. "You were impossible back then. And you were infuriatingly persistent," he grinned. "Still are. But that's why I fell for you." Olivia leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you too, Benjamin, even when you drive me crazy." Months later, Benjamin stood in the boardroom of Blackwell Ventures, his wheelchair nowhere in sight. Leaning lightly on a cane, he exuded a commanding presence as he addressed the board members. Olivia stood in the corner of the room, a soft smile on her face. She had never seen him like this, so confident, so alive. The man she had come to love wasn't just reclaiming his place in the world as the CEO he once was, but as someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. After the meeting, Benjamin walked over to Olivia with a warm smile. "How did I do?" "You were perfect," Olivia said, slipping her hand into his. "Only because I had you by my side," he teased, his eyes sparkling. They left the building together, stepping out into the lively city streets. Benjamin's hand rested gently on Olivia's back as they walked toward the waiting car. The future seemed wide open, stretching ahead like an endless road. That evening, Benjamin and Olivia stood on the rooftop of Blackwell Ventures, gazing out over the sprawling city. Its lights glittered like stars against the dark sky. Benjamin leaned on the railing, his cane resting beside him, while Olivia stood close, her hand firmly entwined with his. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Benjamin asked, his voice light. Olivia laughed. "How could I forget? You were grumpy and impossible." "And you were infuriatingly persistent," he replied, laughing softly with her. They stood in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared journey hanging between them. "We've come a long way," Olivia said softly, her voice filled with wonder. Benjamin nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "And this is just the beginning." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I'm so grateful for you, Olivia, for everything you've done for me and for us. I promise, I'll never take you for granted." Olivia smiled, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You've given me just as much, Benjamin, more than I ever thought I deserved." He cupped her face gently in his hands, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "You deserve the world, Olivia Collins, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." As the city lights shimmered around them, they kissed, an embrace that felt like the perfect culmination of their struggles, their victories, and their love. In that moment, it wasn't about where they had been, but where they were going. A future built on trust, resilience, and love that had defied the odds. They stood together, watching the city below them, their hearts full and their spirits unbreakable. For the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly as it should. As Benjamin and Olivia stood side by side, looking out over the city that had brought them together, they both knew that their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Time went on, and Benjamin continued to make remarkable strides, both physically and emotionally. Each day brought him closer to reclaiming the life he once knew. With Olivia's unwavering support, Benjamin discovered a renewed sense of purpose, not as the CEO of a successful business, but as a man determined to create a life built on love, integrity, and vulnerability. Olivia, too, had changed. She had always been strong, but now she was stronger than ever. Her love for Benjamin had transformed her, reminding her of the incredible power of resilience and the beauty of second chances. She never imagined that taking a job as a nurse would lead her to a life she hadn't dared to dream of. But here she was, standing by the man she loved, ready to face whatever came next. Their bond grew deeper each day as they navigated life together, meeting challenges with determination and hope. With every passing moment, they peeled back the layers they had once hidden behind, learning more about each other's strengths, weaknesses, and the complexities of who they truly were. There were moments of doubt, times when the past felt heavy, but in those moments they held on to each other, finding comfort in the unshakable connection they had built. Benjamin made peace with his past, releasing the bitterness and anger that had held him captive for so long. He reached out to those he had once been close to, old friends, family members, and colleagues, and began rebuilding the connections he had lost. To his surprise, despite his past mistakes, there were people who were ready to forgive him and support him as he moved forward. As for Olivia, she finally allowed herself to dream. She had spent her life putting others first, sacrificing her own needs for her family's sake. But now, with Benjamin by her side, she allowed herself to believe that she could have the life she had always wanted. She felt a sense of security and love that she had never known before. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before they knew it, Benjamin and Olivia were standing on the threshold of a new chapter in their lives. They had both changed in ways they hadn't expected, but together they had grown into the people they were always meant to be. One evening, as they sat together in their cozy apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Benjamin turned to Olivia with a gaze full of admiration. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked softly. Olivia smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Every day," she whispered, "and every day I'm amazed at how much we've overcome together." Benjamin reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "I don't know how I would have made it without you, Olivia. You've been my strength, my anchor, and now I'm ready to be yours." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she leaned in to kiss him, the depth of her feelings overwhelming her. "I've always been yours, Benjamin," she whispered against his lips, "always." As they embraced, all the struggles, the pain, and the misunderstandings they had endured seemed to vanish. In that moment, there was nothing left but the love they had built, the future they had dreamed of, and the unbreakable bond between them. They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but they were no longer afraid of the challenges that lay before them. Together, they had found strength in each other, and with that strength, they were ready to face whatever life had to offer, side by side, hand in hand. And so Benjamin and Olivia began the next chapter of their journey, a journey filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could conquer anything